Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our second class for week 10. So we started NextJs last week, and we were halted by a bug that seemed to be impossible to solve as at last class. So after the class, I think Enoch stayed back. We actually looked at why we're having that error, looked at the documentations and realized where we were having the issue, right? So we'll just continue from where we stopped. Okay, so we had this provider, we're trying to create this provider. And apparently, Next.js is a server side, is a server based framework, right? So typically for everything you are creating on Next.js, it's assumed that you are trying to work with Next.js provided server, or you are trying to utilize the benefits of SSR, right? Server-side rendering. Yeah. So what we need to, when we are utilizing things like React router on Next.js and some other application or some other hooks like the likes of use effects and some use selectors and everything that most of the things that comes with uh, Redux toolkits, right? We have to add that we have to specifically tell the application that we want to utilize this on the server side, on the client side, rather. So where we're getting it wrong was the fact that we did not outrightly specify that we want to use clients on our application, right? So in this place here where we are trying to create provider, this provider imports will not work because it is not a server-side importation. It's not something that can work on the server side. So for it to work, we must explicitly define that we are using it on, we want to use the client side of this, of Next.js to handle this particular importation or implementation. Do you understand? Are we following? So moving forward, yeah, so basically that was just the issue we had. Our code was correct. We were on point, but what I'll do is I'll walk us through the code again so that we can just have a full understanding of what's happening. Then we can move forward. Is that fine? I need quick response so that we can move fast. All right. Okay, so firstly, we understand our code structure, right? We understand that we have about us, and for about us, we have page.js. For contact us, we have page.jsx. For users, since we want to dynamically call this user route, we have user folder / ID as a folder. Then we have page.js within inside the ID folder, right? Then we have, yes, our global CSS, of course. And then we have our layout and our entry point, our page, right? Page.js. Good. So we created a store provider last time, and then we also created our slice, right? And our store. So let's just pick it up from the store. So what we did here in store is we imported our user slice and then implemented it and then created our store and like configured our store and added that slice to our reducer, right? Then for our slice, we created our slice, and for this, we had our fetch user API call, which we are fetching JSON placeholder type code user API. and we are calling these users by IDs, right? Now we created our user slice and called it user, right? We have our initial state for user status and error. And then we have our reducers, right? Then we had our extra reducers where we're defining our pending, we're handling our asynchronous actions, picking up what to, and giving actions for what we want to see when it's pending, fulfilled, and rejected. So for this slice, we are going to do a little bit of upgrade to this slice. We want to also get these users. We want to get the users information without ID, right? So we want to get all the users and also display all the users at some point, right? So we're going to remove this ID from here. Okay. All right, so fetch users. All right, so we have fetch users, and this will be fetch users because no two actions should be the same, right? So if this is fetch user and this fetch user will not successfully make this API call. So this action is fetch users and this action is fetch user. So for this fetch user, we are going to be fetching it based on the user's ID, right? And for user/fetch users, we are just fetching all the users. Is there anything we don't understand here? I think that's like something we understand already. All right, good. So for our extra reducers, we're going to define cases for fetch users, right? So just for more readable code, we're going to need this and say fetch users. All right, and say, all right, so we can now differentiate them from just looking. We now understand that this extra reducer cases is to handle fetch users, right? Fetch users. And then for this, we're handling fetch user, and fetch user for pending, fulfilled, rejected, right? And for each of them, we are supposed to pass it into state. So for fetch users, we want to have users, right? For fetch users, we want to have users, and then we want to add users to our. So since user is an array, right? We're now going to initialize these users as an empty array on first display, right? So with this now, we are now passing the action of payload. The payload, that's the result from this API call on fulfill to this user state. And we are doing the same thing for just user by passing the result of this API call to just user. Are we good? Can we go? Are we good? All right, so we now created a provider, right? And for the provider, we imported provider from React Redux. And then we also imported our store, right? That we created here. So for our store, for the provider, we added the provider and we passed the store into the provider. And then what we want to do is this provider, we want to pass every other thing as children into this store provider, right? So for store provider, everything that comes within should utilize all the properties of this store. So when we come to our layout, we now import our store provider, right? Are we following? We now imported our store provider, yeah, and then we used it within the body tag of our entry point of our layout, right? So for this body, which is where, within this body, which is where all our code is going to reside, all our implementations will happen. We are now implementing our store provider and making sure that any component that is utilized within this root layout is going to utilize all the states that are being stored in our store. Is that clear? Can we move? Can we move forward? Okay, all right. So we now look at, we now go ahead to look at, so we have our layout done, right? Okay, so we now check out our pages. So for page, we have about us, we have contact us, right? And we also want to display, our users based on the API call we made in this user slice for users. So on our main page, we want to display our users, right? So we come here, and I can remove this for now, since we need just about and contact, right? But let's look at what we have at the moment. So we have our app displaying correctly on the DOM, right? And we have our about us and contact us button, because I did a little bit of styling here to make it look presentable, right? So if we click on about us, it routes us straight to our about us page. Now, why that routing works like that is because we have created our route by creating this folder and passing this page within this folder. This is a route of its own. So anywhere we utilize that route, which is that about us page. So let's assume that maybe we are calling this about us page from a page that is far from this, that is not directly, let's say it's not this page, right? We might assume that this about us page is nested in another folder. We are going to add that folder that is nested in before the about us folder that the about us page existing. Do you understand? So I just did this so you understand the whole concept of folder-based or file-based routing, right? So we don't need React Router DOM to do any routing here. All we need to do is arrange our components properly, and we can utilize their structure to route to where we want to utilize, where we want to find that very or display that very component. All right, or navigate per se to that very component. So let's go ahead and modify this code. So first thing we want to do is we want to dispatch our API calls, right? So for the fact that we want to utilize dispatch API Readers Toolkit dispatch functions, right? And we want to also utilize use effect. We are going to define explicitly that we want to use clients here. Are you following? Are we together? All right. So now we can now say we want to say const dispatch. And for dispatch, we want to import use dispatch from Redux Toolkit. Okay. All right. So then we now if we come here, you realize that here we are not exporting our data, and that can be problematic for us. So we need to export our data from from the user slice, right? So we say export const get user data, and then we want to take that user data from state, and we want to access the state dot user. So this here is the name of this slice, right? This user here is the name of the slice that we are passing, that we are trying to pick. So we are saying we want to take the state of the whole of this slice, so that when we are getting data, we can get every other state within this slice from this get user data, like destructure it from this get user data. So if we come here, if we come to our dispatch and we want to now get that data, we can now say const, since we have users there, right? So the structure users, we have status, and then we also have error. Oh, sorry. We also have error, right? So for this, we can now say use selector right? And then we pass in our get user data. And definitely we'll need to import it. Okay. So as you can see, we've imported this get user data here, and then we're using use selector to pick out all the states that exist within this slice. And then we'll destructure all of them here. So now we have users, we have status, we have error, right? But we haven't actually initiated that API call because we haven't dispatched the API call yet. So we'll say use effects. Yeah, use effect and initiate the arrow function, and then open it. So we dispatch fetch user, and for fetch users, we import it. So we've imported fetch users, right? We have to add our dependency array. So we say dispatch here. All right. So for this right now, we can say, to test if our implementation is correct, we can say console.log users. So on loading of this screen, this API call should be automatically triggered, right? And if it is triggered, that means we should have new information added to users, right? So let's see if that happens. All right, so let's refresh this and see what happens. Good. So as you can see, we have successfully made our API call, and inside page, we can visualize our users. Are we together? Do we understand what's happening? Are we good? Can I move forward? Let's stay sharp. Faith, are you good? Do you understand where we are? Okay. All right, good. So for this now, since we have our data popping, we can see the structure of our data. We have the address, user address, company, email, ID, right? And we have name, phone number, and username and all. So yeah, so basically we can display this user data now, right? So let's say we want to display the user data as a list, right? So, but before then, we want to handle some things which we are getting from our slides already. We have status and we have error, right? So we want to do some high level expectations that, or some high level stuff that's expected of the developer, right? So always have it at the back of your mind that for user experience, it is important that you handle error messages and manage your state properly so that your users understand what's happening at a particular time on the UI, right? So let's say we want to specifically let our users know when our application status, when the app is loading, or say when we are expecting information, right? And the information has not come yet. So we can now explicitly define that if our status, right? If the status, this one is equals to loading, we want to return or you can say display. We want to display a p tag, and for that p tag, we want to say loading. We want to say loading. So class name, let's give it text center. And then, yeah, I think that's good. Maybe we should. All right, okay. So we have this. Agency with empty all right, so we have our loading states implemented, right? So we are saying if this status is equals to loading, that is, if our application has not yet loaded the data, we want to display this. We don't want to display an empty screen. We want our users to know exactly that, okay, don't be scared. I know, don't be worried. Your data is loading, right? So when you come here, if we refresh this, when there's no data, you see that there's going to be that loading state, right? Are we good? So we also do the same thing for our failed state, right? So when status is failed, we want to display our error message, that error that we are getting from our slice, right? That we defined in our slice. So we are going to be displaying our error if it fails to fetch, right? So in essence, what we are saying is at this stage of the application, we want to display loading on the UI. Then if it's successful, we want to display our data. But if it's not successful and it shows failed, we want to take the error message that is already inside our API call or our answers error, right? And pass it to this error and display the error. So you see how this whole extra reducer is coming to play in this scenario. Are we together? Are we good? Let's response, please. Okay. All right. So we can now go ahead and display what we want, display our users, right? So we can say UL, and give it a class name. Let's say text of to Excel. Okay. 24 the columns of LC4 and then okay. Okay, so we have this so let's add a h1 tag so that we can differentiate where we are displaying our users, right? So h1 call class name, let's give it text to Excel, yeah, and bold and bold into okay. So we have these and we say users. All right. So let's go ahead and map user. So it seems like tab 9 is on point today. Map user and we say user okay. User and then okay, and I'll say li. And we want to utilize the ID as the key. So we say key user dot ID, right? And we can add class name and give it T2 so that each list item can have a little space from the other. All right, so let's use a span to display what we want to display. We want to say span class name. Then let's give it text gray 300. All right. And then we want to display user dot name. All right, so we have our span to display user dot name, right? So if we come here, we should be able to visualize the users, all the names of the users. Are we following? Are we together? All right. So maybe let's make it a little bit high level, right? So let's say MB of 4, and then let's look at the structure of our data. So based on the structure of our data, what else can we display? So we can display the name and the user, the name, and what else? What else do we display on this first page? Suggestions from this data. We can have all other things within, or should we just tie them into a box like we did with this to show that they are clickable? Suggestions, let's make it an interactive class, please. Yeah, and display their website on this. So we should display their websites here too. No, we're not using the model. We are doing routing. Okay, so let's go ahead and just let's say okay. So let's say we want to also display. Well, since we have a details page for them, let's just display other things within the details page. Let's for this screen, let us rather give them a little bit of extra styling. So let's give each list item a border. Okay, so let's give them px of 3. Okay, all right, we're good. And so to differentiate them, let's give them should we use blue? Use 600. Okay. All right. So we have our users and we have all the usernames, right? Their first name. And so for user experience, if you notice, when I hover on them, my cursor changes to like an input kind of a cursor, like input cursor, right? So that doesn't really tell us that we're trying to click on them to lead to another screen. But in a scenario where we add cursor pointer, so now when we hover on it, it changes to a pointer to show that, okay, you can actually click on these items, right? But clicking on them right now takes us nowhere. As you can see, I'm clicking, takes us nowhere. So let's go ahead and make it take us somewhere, right? So for this span now, we are going to convert this span into a link component. And this link component is coming from NextJs, right? So we say href. And then for this href, we're going to use the backticks to define the route. So we say user. Remember, we have user folder. That's users folder, right? Then from users folder, we have the ID. So for the ID, just the way we used to handle dynamic IDs in React, that's exactly how we are handling this ID. So we are saying we want to route based on the ID of a particular user, right? Any questions? Any questions before we move forward? Nope, so no questions. So yeah, so basically we are routing to this users page by ID. So you see that we did not add, there's no need to add the page itself because just the folders that we are utilizing, and we have 2 folders. And for the second folder, it is the ID. So what happens here now is when this link is clicked, it routes you based on this user ID. So on the route, we can visually see that we are looking at the particular ID of this user, right? So let's say we come here and click on this. So you see that it's giving up because we have not actually done the setup. The default export is not a React component, so we need to do work on our page where the ID is. But as you can see, we have our route correct. So when we click on that user, you see that it was the first one we clicked on, and you can see that the ID is 1. So if we go back and check, you see that for this very one, for the first one that we click, you see the ID is 1. Are we good? Can we move? All right, so let's go to our page now and actually take care of our page components, right? Okay, so typically for our page component, it's just about the same thing with what we've done already in this component, right? We are going to make an API call and just display the user based on the ID, right? So for this, we can just go ahead and import. So import our use effects. Use effects from React. Then we import, yes, our dispatch and selector. And then we also import our fetch user, but this time we are importing fetch user. All right, and then we also import our get user data. Okay. All right, so let's go on. So for this now, we have we'll import one more thing that we are going to be using. So like you notice there, when we clicked here and we came to this other component, right? When we came here, you see that we have our user ID here. So what I want to do is utilize the ID based on the route that is being displayed here, based on the path name. So within this path name, I want to be dynamically picking this ID and using this ID to make the API call that will display the user based on ID in this component, right? So for that to happen, I will import an existing hook called use path name from next navigate, right? So for this use path name, what it does is you can get the path name from the page where you are located. React has its own, I'm sure, I think we did it in React too, but it's not the same process, right? For this, they have their own hook to handle this, right? So for this component, if you notice when I click here, you see that they're already giving me a hint, right? They already give me a hint that I need to use client for this to work. Because we have use effect, we have use dispatch, we have so many React-based things here that are client-based. So we want to say use client so that anything we are utilizing here can work. All right, so let's say export default function. So we say user, let this component be user profile. All right. Okay. So we have const, we want to dispatch, and for dispatch, we want to bring use dispatch. Okay. Then we want to also destructure user. So in the last page, we were destructuring users, but this time we want the states for users, right? And then we also want the status, and we also want error, right? So to be clear about the same thing we did before, and then we say use selector and get user data. Okay. Something is wrong. Okay. Okay. So we can now say const path name, and then we say use path name. So for this path name, we want to get the user ID. So let's say const user ID, and we say equals to path name dot split based on this, and we want to pop. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and do our use effects. Use effect. And then we want to dispatch, yeah, our user. Okay. Then we want to add our dependency array. And for this dependency array now, we are going to add user ID. Right? And we're also going to add dispatch. Okay. All right, so we can just, to save time, we need this. So we can just add this here. So we can use this to handle our loading state and our failed states, right? Let's go ahead and return our results. So we say, let's say div, and class name, say, adding 8. Okay. So we want to have H1. And for H1 class name, let's say text 2XL. Boom. And then MB4. Okay. So for this, we want to add our user profile. And then for user profile, we want to say user name. So you might be wondering why we're using user.name. So let's go ahead and visualize what user.name, what the user. Let's visualize what the user object looks like. So if we come here, all right, so we have an error. Each user is not defined. Okay. So we haven't imported this. All right. Okay, so we have our object here displayed. So we have name. All right. So we're using the username. So we want to also display. Let's have the email next. Let's have the email. And let's have, so that's called optional chaining. So we have a question, why the question mark, right? This question mark. So this is an optional chaining. What optional chaining does is, assuming we are trying to get something that doesn't exist at the moment here. So there's a chance that this name attribute, right, can be undefined. So in a scenario where it is undefined, it will throw an error. So let's say we add user dot bro, right? This bro does not exist in this object. So if we come to display this now, it should give us an error. hold on, should run your so let's remove all this. So okay, good. So good. So you see this cannot read property of null. This error happened when the loading state was when we're having the loading state. Why? Because as at that time when it is loading, there is nothing like user.name anywhere. Are you following? So as at the loading state, this user.name does not exist, right? Because the API call is still being made. This user.name does not exist. So what this optional chaining is doing is it is saying if this user.name does not exist, don't bother about it, wait for it to come. Are you following? Do you understand? All right. Okay, so that's what's called optional chain. You can still go ahead and research to get better understanding of what optional chaining does. Okay, good. So we have our okay, this repeated user profile. We'll change that. So user email, and then what else? Website, user websites. Okay. Let's say user company name. So let's say company. Let's say user company dot name. Okay. So user company dot name. Let's have address. Address. Let's have this is company name. Let's have address. For address, we have address city. Address street city. Okay. So let's say address. Okay, then city. Address street plus address streets plus yes City. Okay. Are we together? All right, so we want to have space here. Yes. Good. So we want to for this space. Want to check them. All right. So we have apartment this Coolers Light Guam Buru, right, as the user address. All right. So we want to let's give it let's make it a little bit unique, right? Because it seems like they are sharing the same color, so it's almost impossible to see what we are doing, right? So we can say all right, so let's give span and class name. And then let's say text of text of LG, right? Font should be normal. And then we should be text color of let's say, what color should we use? Let's use red. Purple. Let's use red. Okay, then we cover that. All right. So for each of them, we want to now do the same. Okay. All right. So are we good? Are we following? Is it looking like rocket science? Okay. All right. Good. So let's carry on. Oh, this is not necessary. Don't mind this thing. It's prettier that does this, but it doesn't affect the code. Okay. All right. So we have our user informations, right? So let's see if we're looking good. Okay. So our text red did not take effect. And why is that? Should still work like this. Okay. And we would want to give a little spacing. So let's see why that spacing does not exist right now. Works. Okay, so I think our style did not affect this Y. Okay. Let's just add everything to it. All right, so we have our user profile, right? We have user profile as a user full name. Yeah, so we have user full name, user email, user website, user company name, user address. Okay. So let's give this P. Leave this probably. Not PX, okay. Okay, so we have our, let's make it a card. Border to border. Okay, so this was still to put it into okay. So are we good? Can we visualize what we are doing here? Are we comfortable? Do we understand what we're doing? So questions, any question? Let's hear questions. There's no way you guys will not have questions. At least one. It doesn't necessarily have to be a question that shows that you don't understand what's happening. Maybe there's something thinking about how to utilize what we've done and you want clarity. You can ask those kind of questions as far as they are in context of what we are trying to do. Okay. So still no questions. We're all solid. All right, so we come back here, we can visualize all our users, and then we can dynamically visualize these users based on the usernames. So as you can see, this is Erwin Howell, and all the information here is different address. If we go back, we pick another user, everything is dynamic. Are we together? So as it is now, we have dynamic routing here, and we have normal routing here done. So our about us page, we can visualize our about us page, likewise our contact page, and then we can also dynamically visualize the content of this user information, right? So is there any okay, you have question. All right. Unmute yourself and ask your question.
So I wanted to ask why we're still using that use client for this part of our code. Is not someone like server because I fetch from an API or something?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
I wanted to ask why we are still using use clients in this our code here. It's not like server side because we're fetching dynamically from an API. Why are we still using the use client mark up there?
So this is not actually server-side rendering yet. Yes, we are getting the API from a server, right? But we are not utilizing the server-side rendering functionalities of NextJs yet. That is why we are still deploying the use client, right? And the most appropriate answer to that question is we are utilizing client-side importations. So things like Redux are client-side based. Those kind of importations, we have to specify that we are using clients. So that, yes, exactly. So that it will not flag us. If I remove, let's assume that I remove this now from here, right? Excuse me. Yeah, so I remove that from there. We are going to have error. So now you can read through the error message. You are importing a component that needs use effects. It only works in a client component, but none of its parents are marked with use client. Do you see that? So there are several components by default. So because NextJS is a server-based framework, right? Everything is expected, or the application expects anything that is not marked with this use client. It expects that is supposed to be handled via the server. Do you understand? So based on that, every implementation that is more like a client-based implementation or importation or usage or yeah, it will not work without this flag, without us flagging it as with this use client flag. Is that clear? Is that clear? Okay. Any other question? Okay. So I guess we can move now since we don't have any other question. So always clean up your code, all this console.log. Always clean up console.log. All right, so that is that for running API calls and dynamic routing on Next.js. So which component is not saved? All right. So we'll be calling it a day here. So in our next class, we'll look at server-side rendering. So prior to that class, everybody should get themselves a little bit grounded with the concept of server-side rendering. Explore what we have learned today so that because in understanding what we've done today, it will help you understand whatever we are going to be doing with regards to server-side rendering. Okay? All right. Thank you all for having me, and have a great week ahead and a great weekend too. Bye, guys.